Hello. Welcome to one of my favorite lessons in technical writing, the lesson on formal English. Verily, my lord. Formal English. Does it mean like we talk, like we're from the 1600s? Or does it mean that we utter that phrase correctly? As in, we would say, does formal English mean that we speak as if we are from the 1600s? That's formal, right? Remember, talk is not the correct usage there, but it is the common usage. We don't say that you talk English, we say you speak English. We don't say you talk formally, we say you speak formally. Verily, my lord. Somebody asked if we are going to translate the plain English assignment back to formal English. Man, you read my mind. That's what I was going to do. But then I thought of a cooler thing, so we're going to do that cooler thing, and I will describe it later. It's one of my favorite party games. Probably you don't know it, but maybe you've played it, so you can try to guess what it is. The formal English assignment, one of my favorite party games. And that'll go up once this lecture is done here. So, what is a formal English? Someone said Backstroke of the West Part 2 and Spin the Bottle. Why is Spin the Bottle a formal English party game? That doesn't even make sense. No. No, it's a game related to formal English. It's a game some of you will enjoy and some of you will really hate. Alright, so why do we even have formal English, right? What's the point? Why did we invent a formal English? Why don't we all just speak plainly to another in a common way? Well, as you might notice, I have a pretty pessimistic outlook of why people speak in formal language. That isn't to say that I don't speak in formal language. I usually do. And that should tell you something about me based on the reasons that I think people speak formally. So don't read too deeply into this, but let me give you my opinion on why people speak in formal language, in formal terms. So first I'm going to give you this quote from Winston Churchill, which he probably did not say, but it is commonly attributed to him. It's that tact is the ability to tell someone to go to hell in such a way that they look forward to the trip. Sometimes tact is replaced with diplomacy, and they say something like, diplomacy is the ability to tell somebody to go to hell in such a way that they begin to ask for directions, something along those lines. So I think that that's a very accurate and true statement, even if it's not something that Churchill actually said, as to why we have formal English. Because formal English is essentially tact and diplomacy in its lingual form. It is the lingual version of tact and diplomacy. And this is perhaps the primary reason that we speak to each other formally, or at least the primary reason that we did. And at the same time, probably the reason that people speak to each other formally so little today. It's that if you spoke to somebody in plain language back in the day and they didn't like what you said, you were liable to get shivved for it. And if you said that in a more formal way, you were much less likely to get shivved for it. There was essentially a diplomatic culture of a way you could speak and not get your ass kicked. And that's basically where formal English emerges. So it's also a polite way or an acceptable way to insult people or to say something bad about them. But that also means that it's a polite and socially acceptable way to criticize people. And criticism is basically essential for any kind of peer relationship, any kind of complex governance or anything like that requires some form of criticism. And that's one of the reasons why you don't see most of the human population speaking any kind of formal English until basically the Industrial Revolution and beyond, because up to a certain point, most of humanity were not equals and did not have a right to criticize their betters, and so they basically didn't get to learn formal English. Or if they did, they only got to learn the version that servants were allowed to know. So formal English is the language that high-ranking equals with power over one another, and the presumed ability to hurt each other use in order to communicate and resolve their differences and all these sorts of things. Let's have a look at some formal English that somebody gave me in the comments. It appears that the way you carry yourself is very honorable. So honorable, in fact, that you have been invited to the realm of the Doomslayer. Would you like me to accompany you? Sure, that's pretty formal. But the key, the most essential and the essence, I think, of formal language is the ability to say, very politely, go fuck yourself, right? I think that this is the most essential term that formal English exists to say. In fact, I would say that entire pieces of formal text, entire books and essays are written just to utter this phrase in a very roundabout way. So in either chat, I would like you to give me your very best, not expletive, formal English, go fuck yourself. So how do you tell somebody something like that in the most formal and polite way possible? Because that is essentially, I think, the essence of formal English. To have that kind of tact and diplomacy to say that sort of thing without saying it. And by the way, why we're veering off to formal English today, of course, it is the presidential debate where a couple of people will attempt to formally do exactly what I just described. They will basically repeatedly utter those words in various different iterations that are not quite that, but essentially that's what they mean. They could basically just go back and forth and throw expletives at each other, and that would be essentially a translation of what's actually being said, but instead we say it formally, and that makes all the difference. So in either chat, give me your very best attempt to translate the most purposeful formal phrase into formal English. All right, formal English is pompous. Of course it's pompous. Why would you use a simple word when a more complicated and usually substantially more specific phrase will do? Why use a simple phrase when a hard phrase can be used instead of I'm sorry that something? It is with my deepest regrets. What's the difference between being sorry and saying that something happens with your deepest regrets? Well, a lot. There are a lot of ways to interpret I'm sorry that. You could be assuming guilt in that case. It is with my deepest regrets does not really assume any guilt. It also, I'm sorry, doesn't tell the reader whether or not you have any regrets, whether you feel any guilt or shame for whatever it is you're sorry for. Well, clearly you have regrets if you say it is with my deepest regrets. These phrases have different meanings, and the latter is much more specific and obviously also much longer and much harder to understand. Instead of you should, it is preferable to. Why should somebody? What does it mean to should? Right? What does it mean that someone should do something? Well, it is preferable makes more sense. The one option is better than the other. So whatever it is that's preferable is objectively better than the alternative. This is more specific. Instead of I disagree, we have reached an incongruity. Incongruity is a hard word. Not everybody knows what it means. But clearly, it's better than a simple disagreement. Now we have reached an incongruity. All right, let's see if anybody took to my challenge and translated my phrase in either chat. I'll look at Discord first. It's go sex and travel. Well, that's not very... I mean, that's a literal translation, but that doesn't particularly make sense. And in YouTube chat we have, your attitude is not befitting to me right now. I kindly ask you to give me some proper distance in order for me to calm my nerves and forget that we interacted today. Yeah, sure. Maybe a little too nice. Maybe a little too nice. Let's see if you can get meaner without losing the formality. Really capture the essence of what it means to diplomatically tell somebody off. And why is being pompous a good thing? Why is using a long word better than short word? Why is long good? Because it dampens the emotional hit of blunt language. That's why primarily we use formal language, because it makes the emotional damage of insulting somebody just a little bit easier to bear. And likewise for anything else, likewise it makes sad thoughts less sad. It makes happy thoughts less happy. It just dampens the emotional hit of all of what would otherwise be plain language, generally speaking. Now, there's a lot of, obviously, pieces written in formal language that are still very emotionally evocative, but they get there through a different means. They have to tell you a story or something of that nature. They have to bring you into the situation. It's not the language itself, usually, that gives you the emotional charge. So formal language is just less emotionally charged to begin with. We take out some of that extra emotion that's captured in words that we don't typically use in formal language, like hate and all of these different things. Oh, I didn't mean to gloss over anybody's. Let's see, we got another one. Desperately crave. Oh, okay, here we go. It appears to me that the way you carry yourself is very honorable. So no, I already read that one. I'll see a good one. I already read your attitude is not befitting to me one right now. Okay, so why else is being pompous good? Well, when you use long words and complicated words that are more specific, it makes it harder to misinterpret your language. So people that tend to speak plainly all the time tend to be misinterpreted fairly often because it's easy to misinterpret very plain English expressions. For example, let's say that your sports team is going up against another sports team and you want to indicate that you think you will be victorious over them. Now, see, I phrase this very formally. What plain English expressions might you use to communicate this? Where you might say, we're going to kill those guys, or we're going to dominate tonight, or we're going to decimate them. Okay? All of those are inaccurate. You are not going to murder them. You are not going to dominate them. And you are certainly not going to kill a tenth of their population. So all of those are wrong and subject to people's misinterpretation down the road. And that's just a really simple and silly example. There are all kinds of different examples like that where the plain version ends up being misinterpreted, whereas the formal version would have been specific enough not to be. Sometimes it's the other way around, though. Sometimes people are too dumb to understand the formal one and end up misinterpreting that too. So this can be a double-edged sword. Another reason to use big words is that it conveys your seriousness and intelligence. If you use formal English, you are a serious and intelligent person. This is kind of an unfortunate element, I think, of our cultural language right now, that people who are serious and intelligent have to communicate in formal English because formal English is, to many of us, rather annoying. And because this was not historically the case, it was often the case that important, serious people would communicate in plain English. And it is still the case today that people do. It just happens to be that many people will not interpret you as serious or intelligent if you do not communicate formally. So, for example, let's look at Shakespeare, who wrote all of his plays in what we would really call the plain English of his time. At the time Shakespeare was writing in the 1400s or whatever, English didn't even have a dictionary yet. And a lot of the expressions in his plays he made up. You wouldn't do that in formal English, make up a bunch of expressions. There's a ton of insults. There's a ton of offensive language. You definitely wouldn't do that in formal language. So we consider sort of Shakespearean dialogue to be kind of a formal dialogue, but really it's a plain English dialogue from the 1400s. And let's loop back around to this in a bit. We'll talk about why Shakespearean language is so hard to understand today if you read the originals. Okay, the formal English translation in Discord, I got one more. I got, you so desperately crave. I do not understand how that is telling somebody off formally in any way. That doesn't really sound like much of a tell-off. It's certainly not a hard-hitting one. Okay. So, formal English is... It seems to keep on not saying. Okay, I'm guessing it was pretty offensive if YouTube is rejecting it. So formal English is exclusive. That's one of the reasons that we use formal English. Again, it's unfortunate that we do this because it does exclude a significant portion of the population. All right. From the Discord, telling somebody off formally. With all due respect, which in this case turns out to be very little, it is with great passion that I inquire you to fornicate with yourself, such that thereby you may acquire the self-gratification you so desperately crave. I think fornicate was the word that the chat filter probably blocked, which is funny because that's a very formal word. Yes, but if you were being even more formal, you wouldn't mention fornication because that is a cultural taboo, and we don't mention cultural taboos when we truly speak formally. So you would tell somebody off in the most non-offensive possible way while still communicating the expression. So again, please feel free to take another crack at it. Give me your most formal tell-off that is in completely formal English with no reference to any kind of actual insult or anything that might be inappropriate, but still manages to communicate that you absolutely hate someone and despise their idea or them or whatever. So yeah, give that a crack in either chat. The I really don't like you, or I really don't like what you're saying, but I'm going to do it in the most formal language possible. All right, so back to formal English being exclusive. So one of the reasons that people write in formal English is unfortunately, well, this might not be deliberate. It might be just because that certain people feel that formal English is a better way to communicate. But the end result is that many people with a low verbal IQ are cut off from understanding your content entirely. And this is definitely true of professions like the law. The law is clearly written to require lawyers. Law is very formal and is well beyond the understanding of even very intelligent lay people. Even quite intelligent lay people often stumble upon issues in the law, which not only is written formally, but also is written formally in its own sort of special advanced law language, where expressions like shall and will have different meanings. What is the difference between shall and will? So if a contract says, you shall work every fourth Saturday of the month versus you will work every fourth Saturday of the month, what is the difference between those two terms, generally speaking? Does anybody know? What's the difference between you shall work every fourth Saturday versus you will work every fourth Saturday? And then, of course, there are other variants like you should, you must. I mean, do those typically appear in law too? All right, I have another crack at it. The manner in which you just approached me makes me visibly sick. Begone, I hope that your offspring would never consider the idea of joining you in Christmas celebration. Good. Formally language, yes, I like the formal use of language there, but you're still directly insulting the subject, which is still not great formal language. You have to tell them off without actually insulting them directly. This is a true formal language tell-off. So you've got to tell them that you despise them without actually saying that you despise them. You don't say that they make you visibly sick. You insinuate that they make you visibly sick. I will give you one going back to Winston Churchill, the idea of the tact and diplomacy. I'm going to butcher the actual quote, but I believe when confronted with somebody, he said something along the lines of, if I was married to you, then I would certainly have an even greater drinking problem, or something along those lines. See, he hasn't actually told the person off, but he has implied that they are intolerable in that he is not able to bear their presence without not being sober. So something like that is a much better formal English tell-off. Now, this means that a lot of software documentation and software, different software writings, white papers, all these sorts of things, these are often written in formal English too. And one of the reasons that these kind of software guides, tutorials, all these different things are written in formal English is often the same reason that lawyers write law in formal English. It's to exclude people who are not software developers. In fact, software is almost as guilty of this as the law is. They have a tendency to use words and turns of phrase that are very specific to the software industry. They tend to invent complex words like polymorphism and then expect lay people to have a chance to know them. If any of you can give me a real quick layperson translation of polymorphism, you win a golden cupcake, because I don't think I've ever heard any two people define it the same way. It's one of those words that confounds even people within the industry, so it's certainly way too impenetrable for people outside of it. So we're pretty guilty of doing this same thing, and some of that is on purpose. We want to write our content in such a way that only people in our field can understand it, and all those dummies in the general population, they don't get it. And this is true of white papers, it's true of tech news, it's true of a lot of tech media, it's true of documentation, it's true of tutorials, it's true of online classes for software development. Once you learn the lingo and get up to speed, then you can understand these, but learning that formal lingo creates a barrier for entry that keeps the common unwashed masses away, whether on purpose or not. In response to my shall versus will question, somebody said shall seems to not be as harsh as will. It's actually the other way around typically. When a contract says that you shall do something, it is what a layman would interpret as must, as in you have an obligation to do this, whereas will is like a softer obligation. Again, I'm not a lawyer, it's not legal advice, but the shall version typically appears more often in contracts. That's why your contracts are often so difficult to read, because they have silly words like that, because nobody says shall outside of the law anymore. Okay. Another reason to use formal English over plain English, a positive for formal English in this case, is that it tends to endure much longer. When you're writing in formal English, you try to avoid phrases that are colloquial. So you try to avoid the mimetic expressions of the time. You wouldn't say things that probably weren't said a year ago. So you wouldn't say phrases that have just recently cropped up. You wouldn't write I'm going to Google you or something in a formal paper that you wrote in, say, 2006 or something. You might say that in formal language today because it's finally become adopted into the language. But it takes a long time for something to be acceptable in formal language. The kinds of idioms that people do use in formal language, because English is pretty much impossible to use without idiom. English is just completely full of idiom. In fact, that's an idiom, right? English is full of idioms. English is not literally full of anything. It's definitely not literally full of idioms. A language can't be full of things in general. English and most languages really are deeply idiomatic and pretty much impossible to use without all these different weird expressions. However, the idioms that we use when we're writing formally, they tend to be the most common and enduring ones, the ones that have been around for at least decades, maybe hundreds of years, and that's why you can easily pick up a piece of formal writing from the early 1900s, even the 1800s, and read it as if it was written today. So you can pick up all kinds of essays from like Huxley or Russell or whatever, and you can read their stuff as if they had just written it, because they tended to write formally, and that stuff just endures through the generations. So let's look at some common idioms that have endured for a very long time. And so these tend to be used in formal language as well. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Okay, if you're a Stargate fan, you've probably seen that before. And the fact that even alien cultures can understand that was sort of an in-joke. Okay, we got another attempt at telling people off, all right. My day has seemingly been ruined at the exact moment you graced me with your presence. Please go your separate way by the off chance that my day will improve. Almost there. I mean, you're still asking them to depart, but I like it. That's pretty close. That's pretty good. All right, another idiom that actually kind of reversed its meaning. So this is an example of one that didn't endure quite the way that it was probably intended, as blood is thicker than water. This traces back very many hundreds of years across different languages. Some people trace it all the way back to like ancient Judaism. Some people trace it back to like 12th century German or something around those lines. The original meaning of blood is thicker than water is something like blood pact is thicker than womb water, which is the opposite of how we interpret it today, which is that family is more important than other bonds. It actually meant the opposite, that tightly formed bonds, bonds that you forged in blood with your, whatever, blood pact brothers, were more important than your familial bonds. So it actually flipped meanings. You'll see this a lot with expressions over many hundreds of years. They'll end up becoming ironic. We have a tendency as a species to start using things ironically, and then the ironic meaning becomes the actual meaning, and then that goes on for a while, and then it just happens again. So things will oscillate back and forth between two different meanings, the thing that it meant and then the opposite, which makes reading old stuff very difficult, because sometimes you'll see an expression that meant literally the opposite of what it means today 100 years ago. A downside to speaking formally using very old idioms. And then, of course, we know a bunch of other common ones, like get out of hand. It's obvious. Add insult to injury, another obvious one. Probably seen these thousands of times. You can certainly use expressions like that in your formal English. Formal English is a deferential. You always default to respect. You never insult people. Would you be so kind as to? So if you're asking somebody to leave, would you be so kind as to exit, please? Could I trouble you to get out of my face? Would it, if it wouldn't trouble you, could you kindly depart immediately? All of those are obviously meant to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but if you are asking somebody to do something for you, if you're speaking formally, you'll almost always use one of these things, like, I was wondering if it wouldn't be too much trouble, could I kindly, is it possible that I could... All of these kind of differential phrases are conferring respect onto the recipient. You are addressing them as at least an equal, maybe even as a better. You are respecting their time. You are respecting their effort. You are asking them to do something for you. You are never demanding them to do something for you. We'll look at that later. So you are always conferring respect, especially when making a request or when asking for something in general. So you are conferring respect whenever possible. That means that even when you're telling somebody off, which I still haven't gotten a great one, I really want a great formal English tell-off. So even when you're telling somebody off, you would do it in such a way that is respectful. And formal English is never angry. You never want to express harsh, angry, bitter, rage, anything like that. So you wouldn't say, I hate the way that you do something. You'd say, it is with great displeasure that I observe the way you do this. You wouldn't say, this sucks. You would say, this solution is suboptimal. This could use some improvement. We can do better than this. You wouldn't say, this is disgusting. You'd say, I find this disagreeable. I don't like the way this tastes. I have a problem with this. I think this could be improved. Those are all much nicer ways of saying this is disgusting. You never want to be angry. You never want to say, I hate you, or anything like that, because then you're losing, and you're not being formal. And so you're tempering those emotions again, because back in the day, if you didn't, you could get shivved. All right, so you request, you don't demand. Instead of saying, can I is also one of those phrases that has changed meaning significantly over the many years of its usage. So, can I, as in, am I literally permitted to do this, is one version of can. But today, the am I literally permitted to do this is more closely defined by may I. So, if you are trying to ask, am I allowed to do something, you would say, may I, versus can I would be like, is it physically possible for me to do this? That's more close to how we typically use those phrases today. So you would say, instead of, can I change this method to make it a little better, you would say, may I change this method to make it a little better? Instead of saying, can we improve this? You say, is it possible to improve this. And of course, yes, the classic teachers, can I go to the bathroom? And of course they say, well, yeah, you can. And then you pee your pants right there just to assert your dominance. And that's the proper response to when that happens to you. But no, can I go to the bathroom versus may I go to the bathroom? An interesting occurrence of that because you are asking if it is physically possible for you to go to the bathroom at that moment. So can is actually, I would say, appropriate in that situation because you are not only asking for permission, you are asking if it's technically possible in the context of the class and whether or not you're allowed and all these other things. So it's not just asking for permission, but you can use may I as well. Rather than I might do something, I might make a change to this method later. I may change this method later. Which one sounds more differential? Which one sounds more like a request? Well, may, obviously, in this case. So you want to be differential and never demand things when you're speaking formally. Many argue that you should avoid contractions and abbreviations and shortenings. Again, why use a shorter phrase when a longer one will do? Some would say that this is antiquated, but many would argue that this is a rule that should still be applied. Many of you probably learned this in high school. You would learn not to use contractions, you learn not to use abbreviations. I would argue that some contractions have become so ubiquitous that the longer version of them really is acceptable anymore, and so it actually looks weird, not formal, just weird if you use the longer version. And then there are formal contractions or things that people consider formal attractions like shan't, that you could just use shall not, but shan't definitely sounds very formal to everybody. We shan't go to the barn this Thursday versus we shall not. They're both pretty formal sounding. So instead of we can't, you would say we cannot. Instead of we are going to, you might say we are going to, or you could change it to be even more formal. We are engaged to. We're going to go to the barn. We are engaged to travel to the barn this evening. Which one sounds more formal? Clearly the latter, especially because I gave it an accent. Shouldn't you? Well, shouldn't you sounds like a little demanding, a little snippy there, guy. Shouldn't you? We would never do that. We would say instead, perhaps you should do it this way. But again, should. No, that's too much. Instead, perhaps consider doing it this way. There we go. Now it's formal. Right, so shouldn't you? Too pushy, too aggressive. Instead of abbreviations, obviously, like ASAP, we would spell them out as soon as possible. Or we can get even more fancy with it and say post-haste or whatnot. Right, so don't use abbreviations in formal language either. A lot of people will tell you to avoid personal pronouns, and you should, but don't go crazy with this rule because it's not always possible and it's not always the best route, and it gets really crazy if you try to flip your language around and turn everything just to avoid using these few key words. Okay, you should avoid using I, you, he, she, they when possible, but don't go insane with it and avoid them to such an extent that everything that you write becomes incredibly confusing. Notice how if I had finished that phrase without using you, it would have sounded really weird, and I don't even know how I would have done it. Another caveat is that one who uses one as a pronoun is rather difficult to understand. We've been taught, I think many of you have probably been taught, that one is an acceptable pronoun in formal English. I don't know who decided that that was the case. I have certainly read lots of old formal works, and they do not use one as a pronoun altogether that often. In fact, I think they use the regular old pronouns much more often than one. I think you would be pretty hard-pressed to find a nice, famous, well-known piece from, let's say, the early 1900s that's real aggressive on the everybody is referred to as one thing. Maybe in some religious contexts where one is a little bit more common, but seriously, I don't know where that rule comes from, and it's kind of weird. So I would avoid that unless you want to sound like one who is quite strange. Alright, might be it. Yep, that's it. Alright, so I still didn't get a good tell-off, but that's okay. And now let me introduce you to what is my favorite party game, and that is, well, one of my favorite party games. There are two variations of this that I really enjoy, but the one we're going to play today for the in-class assignment that's going to be due next Tuesday is you take a popular song. In this case, we're going to specify that it has to be a rap song, and you convert it into formal English. The other variant of this that I like to play is that you convert it into a 50s style show tune. Both of them are hilarious, but we're going to do the first one today. You take rap music and you convert it to formal English, and you go as formal as possible. Okay, so to begin, I'm going to do this off screen, and I'm going to take requests. I'm going to do one example with you guys. Let's pick a rap song from, let's say, 1995 and later, because hip-hop from before the, well, let's say like 1990 or later, because hip-hop from before the 90s is already pretty formal. You take like a Grandmaster Flash song, and it's already pretty close to formal English, so you really don't start to get this sort of separate language train going until like the 90s, early 2000s. And, obviously don't pick anything that's super explicit. You can pick things that are explicit, because when you translate them into formal English, you will remove all of the explicitness. So, I'm taking requests. Mercy. Okay, let me see how clean the lyrics to Mercy are. I'm pretty sure I remember them not being so bad. Let's see. Well, there's only a couple light sexual references in there, and they're really double entendres, so I'm gonna roll with it. I think that's clean enough. Okay. So let's do Mercy. I'm just going to do the first stanza or so. Okay, and we'll do this together, so you guys should propose some recommendations here for me. Okay. Make that as big as I can make it. And then we'll make another one over here. Alright. Well, it is a weeping and a moaning and a gnashing of teeth. I did not know that that's how that started. Okay. Look at that. Alright, how do we translate "it is a weeping and a moaning and a gnashing of teeth"? This is why I like rap for this purpose, because oftentimes, in order to get the rhymes to work, they already go to a very formal place with it. So, a weeping and a moaning and a gnashing of teeth already sounds like a very formal expression. How can we translate "it is a weeping and a moaning and a gnashing of teeth" into formal English? Yeah, I did not know that it started with that. I didn't even know that there were words at the beginning. I think this part is just mumbled. Big problem with mumble rap. That you can't understand any of it. Which is why we're just doing the lyrics, because yeah. Alright, part of this game, by the way, is that you're going to write the formal English version out. You're not going to tell your peer reviewer what the original is. So don't link to the original. Your peer reviewers have to guess. So they're going to peer review you, like review the person's formal English and everything, give them criticism, but then also try to guess the song. And I want you all to come back like Thursday or Tuesday of the following week and leave a comment on your own submission and tell them what the song actually was. Okay, don't not tell people. That's just mean. So go back and tell them what the song actually was. All right, any ideas on how we can translate this first line into formal English? This is a tough one. Well, it is a weeping and a moaning and a gnashing of teeth. What does that even mean? It is a weeping and a moaning and a gnashing of teeth. Let's start with that. What does it mean that something is a weeping and a moaning and a gnashing of teeth? There is a loud cry of multiple people wailing in the streets. That's a pretty good translation. There's a loud cry of multiple people wailing in the streets. Somebody caught that it is a biblical reference. Yep, that's true. So if you're speaking formally, you can still make those kinds of references. One of the reasons why it's so difficult to understand formal English in some cases is because it's so referential. Again, to prove the intellectual superiority, you go to all the different philosophical and theological references that you can. On the other hand, plain English, as I mentioned, like Shakespeare, is almost impossible to understand because it's all full of slang that doesn't exist anymore. Right? So that's Shakespeare is like almost every line is some slang that doesn't exist anymore. So this song, this rap song, is written in basically plain English. Expressions like thirsty and all that stuff, they're not going to be around in 20, 30 years probably, let alone in almost 600 like Shakespeare. So people in 600 years are going to read Mercy going like, why did the woman need a beverage? That doesn't make any sense. Why didn't he just give her a beverage? Well, obviously it doesn't make any sense if you take it literally. So let's go with there was a, let me get these bigger. There was a loud cry of multiple people wailing in the streets, and see if we can make that even more formal. Right. Even more formal, you would make it a more complicated expression. This is too simple. The clauses are too simple. So you would say something like, in the streets, there were cries. Well, let's say cries and wails. The cries and wails of the masses were heard throughout. I like that. We're going to go with that. In the streets, the cries and wails of the masses were heard throughout. I like it. I'm going to stick with it. Let's move on to the next line. It is a, when it comes to my sound, which is the champion sound. Okay, that already sounds pretty formal. This is a good choice. When it comes to my sound, which is the champion sound. How do we say, when it comes to my sound, it is the champion sound in an even more formal way? And what does this even mean? What does it mean for a sound to be champion? What do they mean by sound in this case? Are they talking about their lyrics? Are they talking about their music? Are they talking about their instruments? Are they talking about their literal, actual sound? My music is the best kind of music, someone says. So somebody thinks that sound is music. This is an example of plain English being ambiguous, where the formal should be specific. I think they mean their music, but this is also a collab, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. But let's go with that. Let's say that sound means music, unless someone has a compelling reason why it doesn't. Well, let's say that among all the musicians of the land, I am the superlative. I like it. Among all the musicians of the land, I am the superlative, the greatest, the ultimate. I might have gone a little too far there. That's almost biblical. So if you have a better version, let me know. Among all the musicians of the land, I am superlative, the greatest, the ultimate. My music is the greatest. No, we'll keep it. Believe, believe. Can't really translate that, so we'll just leave that out. Okay. Lamborghini Mercy, your chick. She's so thirsty. What is meant by Lamborghini Mercy? What is actually the meaning of Lamborghini Mercy? It means I'm very wealthy. I can afford an expensive vehicle. So let's go ahead and just say it straight up. Because of my musical success, because of my musical successes, I am able to afford one of the most expensive motor vehicles. Let's just say automobiles. Automobiles. Because of my musical successes, I think musical success probably makes more sense there. Because of my musical success, I'm able to afford one of the most expensive automobiles available. Your chick, she's so thirsty means that their musical success enables them to attract, partners, women. I don't know, however you want to say it. One of the problems with rap, a lot of degrading women there. So try to pick a song that's maybe a little bit more positive. This one's fine. We'll write our way around it. I mean, it's not like Shakespeare is exactly the most female positive role model either. So, that's kind of how it is. All right, so your chick, she's so thirsty. What is the nicest, most formal way to say your chick, she's so thirsty? Refer back to how you can phrase that you are able to afford one of the most expensive automobiles. Someone's complaining that I said pick a rap song past 1990 or 1995. Yeah, again, because if you look before 1990, they are already pretty formal. That was the era where spoken hip-hop was more popular, so you would see songs that were already pretty easy. Mumble rap is really hard to do this on. Grandmaster Flash's The Message, for example, basically already in formal English, so it wouldn't really even be fun. Anyone got any ideas for Yo Chick, She's So Thirsty? These lyrics are wrong, by the way. It's not your chick, it's Yo Chick. He definitely doesn't say your. He says yo. Any ideas for this line? Yo chick, she's so thirsty. Alright, I'll do it then. My success is so apparent that your partner would make haste to leave you for me, given the opportunity. Isn't that what they mean? That their success is so profound. Let's even go with that. My success is so profound that your partner would make haste to leave for me. Someone said, it appears as if your partner is quenched due to my insane... Well, quenched. They're not literally thirsty and need someone to please them. Probably not what they mean, right? They mean that they're so successful that they can pull away any partner that they wish. That their success is so profound that their partner would leave. All right. Next couple, do two more. I'm in that two-seat Lambo. This goes back to the expensive automobile thing, so let's just translate that to its literal definition. Okay, he's in that two-seat Lambo. Okay, let's say... Let's actually combine these two lines. I'm in that two-seat Lambo with your girl, she trying to jerk me. So, I'm in that two-seat Lambo with your girl, trying to jerk me. How can we translate that to formal English? Both of those together. Any ideas there? We only got like 2 respondents here. Let's hear from somebody else. This is gonna be your assignment in like a couple minutes here. Alright, I'll give it a shot. Even now. even now, in my expensive automobile. We could even say Lamborghini here. You don't have to translate this. All right, someone gave it, me and your partner are in my expensive automobile, and she wants to please me. Again, you've translated it literally, okay, but you haven't actually converted the plain English meaning into a formal English expression. So in your conversion, you have lost the meaning, which is that, again, you could pull their partner away if you so desired, due to your impressive two-seat Lamborghini. Even now, in my impressive two-seat, I'm just going to call it a two-seat Lamborghini. Even now, in my impressive two-seat Lamborghini, your partner, what is she doing? Your partner, let's say, sits in awe, is the least explicit version of this that I think I could put. Maybe something other than awe? What can we do besides awe? Yeah, it's not quite veneration. As I sit in my profoundly luxurious Lamborghini with your partner, she tries to please me. I don't think, again, that the literal meaning or the implication here is the literal jerk me thing. I think the implication here, again, is that you could get, whatever partner you desire because of your sick two-seat Lamborghini. They're not literally saying that at the time that they're recording the music video, they are in the Lamborghini with your partner already. It's all figurative, right? So translate it to its formal and more literal meaning. All right, I think this is good for now. You get the idea. So again, you're going to do this on your end. Pick a rap song. I'll put this assignment up in a couple minutes, so in the meantime, you can look for a song. Pick a song after 1990. Let's say at least 150 words, not counting the lyrics that repeat. So I think Mercy fits that bill maybe just barely. So probably pick something a little bit longer. And that's pretty much it. All right, I'll leave you guys to it. I'll go in Discord if you want to share your awesome rap lyrics with me. I'm always keen to play this game. Again, definitely one of my favorite party games. Absolutely hilarious. And try it out with your friends when you can be more explicit, and it's even more of a riot. And also try the 1950s show tunes version of it for extra laughs. In that version, you don't change any of the lyrics. You just pretend that you're playing it on a piano and that you have to sing it in the 50s show tuney version. Well, it is a weeping and a moaning and a gnashing of teeth. All right. See you guys in Discord and then very soon in Senior Design.